Hey, welcome to Bifocal. Today is part of our faith series, and we have a guest on the show today. We have a minister who's going to be with us today. He's going to talk a little bit how COVID-19 has impacted the church. He was a missionary, and he spent many years working with college kids in a college ministry. I think you're going to enjoy his story. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. As I mentioned today, part of our faith series, we have a minister on the show. We have Nick Gillispie. Nick's a minister up in Bowling Green, Ohio. He's agreed to come on the show. I've had an opportunity to talk to Nick. He's got a pretty interesting story. So, Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, are you at home? Are you in a church office right now? Where are you at?
This is my lovely office. So my first time probably being in here for several weeks with the coronavirus.
So the virus impacts the church quite heavily.
Quite a bit. Apparently when you can't socialize with one another or be gathered in large groups, that's kind of a thing that we do in the church, and it kind of has changed the way that we do our business, you could say.
So are you doing virtual sermons, videotaped sermons? How are you doing all that?
Yeah, so our church does Facebook Live sermons on Sunday mornings. And that's just like our main Sunday gathering. But we do like a lot of small group work, social events, and we've tried to figure out how we're going to begin to navigate those things virtually as well, helping people to feel and be connected to one another.
Yeah. What kind of response do you hear from congregation? How are people responding to that?
Oh, I think the responses can be drastically different, and which is really great. I think it shows the diversity within a given church, like how people feel about it, what they think is best. Some people are like, yeah, they're just, this isn't really real. It's not a real thing. We should be gathered in the church. Some people are like, man, I'm not scared. Let's continue to gather. And some people are on the other side of the spectrum, and they really have a lot of personal fears about their well-being and their family's well-being. What about our children? You just have a big gamut. You're trying to help people understand that as a church, we're trying to make the best decisions for the most number of people to be able to give them environments where they can safely engage in spiritual conversations and spiritual worship together.
Yeah. So do you have any word from the state standpoint, church standpoint, when you guys may start to resume back to normal?
I don't think so. I've sat on a couple of different conference calls with national church leaders the last couple of weeks. And I think that there's just a big question mark on this, and we're not exactly sure what it's going to look like. It's really going to look different state to state. Churches in California, churches in Colorado and Florida just are going to maybe begin to potentially meet either sooner or later than people in Ohio, which is where I'm at right now. But I think for our church right now, we're definitely not meeting in the next month. And I think we're preparing ourselves that, hey, we're probably not going to be meeting for the rest of the summer. And then there's kind of the in-between phase of when maybe we could begin to gather, but it's got to be socially distanced. We're just not sure how exactly we're going to navigate that 6 months out and a year out.
Yeah. So you're in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Yep.
And so what's your role as the pastor minister there? Kind of what is your specific role?
Yeah, so my title is the community life pastor. While I do a lot of different things within the church, the main focus of my responsibility is groups, small groups, men's groups, women's ministry, men's ministry, and then some of that bleeding into outreach and how it is that we're connecting with people in our community.
So that's really changed your role then with the virus. You're a little handcuffed.
Every week has been completely different. And I can have a new idea, and by the next week or by the end of the week, a couple of days later, it's a bad idea. And so there's no experts, I don't think, at this point in time in regards to the church and how we do community virtually.
So how much have you used technology more now than 6 weeks ago?
A ton. If you would ask me probably 3 months ago, virtual church, virtual small groups, virtual discipleship, virtual membership meetings, I would have been like, we shouldn't do that. That's a bad thing. People should be face to face. We were made for community. We were made for fellowship. And probably it's forced me to have to kind of embrace, I think as people, we adapt. And so if people aren't able to congregate and gather even with their own families, and yet they still have a need for relationships, then people are going to begin to find those virtual outlets. And so it's kind of forced me to have to embrace a new medium for relationships and connecting and spiritual growth.
Yeah. I think another thing too that, I don't know if a lot of people really think about, but maybe you could shed a little bit of light on this, but in some respects, the church is very much like a business as well, right? With everything going on and people have lost incomes and lost jobs. Mm-hmm. How's that impacted the church? I got to believe people aren't giving as much. And are you working through things just like a business would work through things?
Yeah, absolutely. There are the financial implications of what's going on. And again, nationally, different churches are just in different places. I don't handle a lot of the finances. We have a finance board and an elder board that really oversees our finances. And the history of our church has been very financially sound. And so we don't have, as our church, we don't have any debt. We don't have any building debt. Our finance team has done an amazing job of shepherding our financial resources. And so for us, we have not felt the crunch right now. Now that might not be true 6 months or a year from now, but we've been very fortunate. Yeah. But in different places, the giving has been different in different churches, and they've had to adjust. And even this summer, we're having to rethink big programs that we put on in the summer, like, for example, Vacation Bible School. Those things probably are not, they aren't going to be happening. And so we're having to readjust our finances in light of just ministry needs.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been up in this church for how long now?
Just a little over a year. So February 1st of 2019 is when I started my position. And prior to that, as you've already covered, I was in campus ministry for almost 15 years.
So you've been in ministry for how long?
Since 2006 was my first year or my wife and I's first year in ministry. Yeah.
Okay. So
14, for a while.
14 years or so.
Yes.
So prior to the church you're involved right now, what were you involved in then?
So I worked with the ministry of Cru. And I worked on the local campus of Bowling Green State University for the bulk majority of my time.
And for Cru, I mean, some people may not know what Cru is. Kind of explain.
Yeah, so
Cru.
Yeah, so Cru is what we call in the church world a parachurch organization, and so it's not a church. It's a partnering ministry that is trying to do something very specific. And so with Cru and the branch of Cru that I worked with, it was about engaging people in conversations about Jesus and raising up leaders. But we wanted to do that in tandem with the local church. And that would be true whether it's in Bowling Green or Ohio State or Michigan or, wherever it is that we kind of serve.
So you were involved with Cru for quite a while.
Yeah, over, I think it was right around 15 years. And so and a lot of time always kind of focused on the college campus. And so my focus was the 18 to 22, 23-year-old on campus.
Now, is that pretty widely known? Is that a national organization? Does every campus have it? What's that look like?
Yeah, well, not every campus has it. But we're an international organization. We're in over 150 countries. and we're on over 600 campuses around the country. I'm trying to think. Oh, and we're not just a campus ministry. We also have Family Life. Some people maybe have heard of Family Life or Athletes in Action or the Jesus Film. There's other branches of our ministry that also target different populations of people.
So Athletes in Action and Crew are under the same organization.
Same organization, but the way we target our audience is going to be different, and thus the type of ministry that we do is going to look very different. So
you spent, what'd you say, 13 years doing that?
Yeah, something like that.
So walk me through a little bit about what's it like working with college kids, and like hours. You got to kind of work around their hours and their schedule, and what'd that look like?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I'll say this: what I loved, and I still do. Like, I still am a affiliate staff with Crew, and I still work with college students even now. I love the age demographic. I think probably personally, like my own story, that's kind of when I really began to grow a lot spiritually, was in college. But it's a huge time of people just trying to find their identity and find themselves. And so because of that, students are asking big questions. And the answers that they find to those questions will most likely set the trajectory of like the rest of their life. And so it was a unique season for people in our country and our culture. And it felt very strategic, like working with that group.
So you mentioned that kids are asking questions and seeking questions. I mean, you were at this for a long time, 13 years. Did you see any common type questions, common type backgrounds, common type denominators that a lot of these kids were kind of either misinformed or just totally uninformed? I mean, was there any trends that you saw in your era of working with college?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, I think every college student is asking spiritual questions, whether they realize it or not. Even asking the question like, who am I and what is my purpose? Those are spiritual.
Yeah, spiritual
questions.
May not be God questions. They're just spiritual.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Make sure we understand. Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the maybe the misinformation that people can have, is that they narrow spiritual questions only to a particular religion or denomination, or to only like theistic type of thoughts or content. When really before that, like, we're all asking that big question of what's my origin? Like, where do I come from? How did I get here? Where am I going? What's going to happen at the end of my life? Like, all of those things have to do.
Do you think those students or individuals across country, the world, how many of those people are substituting spirituality with a understanding of God?
Well, maybe
rephrase
rephrase your question. Help me understand that better.
You talked about all these students they're trying to battle with understanding spirituality, and they have lots of spiritual questions. Mm-hmm. But spiritual could be, as you said, who am I? Where am I going? What's my purpose? Mm-hmm. And how many of those individuals do you come across that they come to grip with maybe that, but it's not necessarily aligned with the truth as maybe you would understand it from your understanding of the word?
Probably most. A lot to most. I think we all have these questions that we're asking. The vast majority of people are kind of boxed in to what the potential places that they're willing to look for in regards to like discovering like truth. A lot of us, we don't know what we don't know. And so we make a lot of assumptions that can either help us, but oftentimes can hurt us. We make assumptions about who we think God is. We make assumptions about what we think maybe the Bible teaches or what Christianity is. And probably a lot of my conversations with those who are actually interested in exploring Christianity, whether they had a background with it or not, a big part of that was helping them understand that whatever they perceive that Christianity was offering might be very different than what it was really offering to them, to humanity.
Where do you think, where does a lot of this misinterpretation or misunderstanding, where's it come from?
I think as people, like oftentimes, like we want the easy way out, right? Like, we want the quick answer. We want the easy way to be able to like feel at peace with ourselves. We want to be able to like, we have to compartmentalize, right? Like you make a first impression about somebody, like I meet you and immediately I'm either have a good impression of you or a bad impression of you. I consider you a certain way, even though I might be really wrong about who you really are. And if I actually spent more time with you, I might actually come to discover some very different things about you than what I first perceived. But we make first impressions so that we can make quick decisions. I like you, I'm going to spend more time with you. I don't like you, I'm not going to spend so much time with you. When it comes to education, I like your class. I'm intrigued by the content. I'm going to spend more time focusing on this class. I'm going to spend less time focusing on this class because it feels less important. And I think we can do that with our spirituality. We can make quick, easy, snap judgments about faith, God, again, the Bible, all these things, so that we can either dismiss it and say, no, let's move on, or I'm actually going to give this some real consideration with my time and my effort and my energy. Yeah. Because to come to genuine faith and belief, it takes time and effort and it's work.
So working with college kids, you had college kids coming to you from all different backgrounds and understandings and mistruths, and you probably had college students that had very good understanding of faith in the Bible, and then you had some that maybe came from a very bad church experience or had no exposure whatsoever. So how do you begin to penetrate that? Where do you start, and what were some of the hurdles for you as a minister working with these college kids?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Well, let me say this. I've met plenty of students coming to college who have a really good, strong church faith background, who actually really weren't all that interested in God. They wanted to meet me, or they wanted to like interact with crew, just so much that they could kind of check the religion box off in their heart, so they could then kind of move on into the other endeavors and pursuits that they were interested in college. I want to show up at crew or the small group. I want to have this conversation with this pastor guy, just so much that he knows that like I've got the Jesus box checked. Him and I are good, and I'm going to go off and do my own thing.
It's like I go to church on Sunday, so therefore I'm okay.
I'm okay. Okay. And no one knows the human heart, but I've met with plenty of people like that weren't actually really open. The fact is that like if God is who the Bible makes him out to be, which is the like all-knowing, eternal, infinite God, the God who actually exists outside of space and time, there's no way for me to be able to ever fully understand him. And so with that being said, like my journey of learning about him is my whole life. Like even me, and I work and I've spent a lot of time reading. I'm getting my theology degree now. Like, I'll never have it all boxed in. And so kind of trying to get back to like college students, I think for me, students either were open or unopened, and their background oftentimes didn't dictate whether or not they were open or unopened. Some people had really bad church experience or religious experiences, and they were very open because there was just something in them that was like, I don't know, but I want to know. And like I said, there's some people that had really great backgrounds and they really didn't want to know. Yeah. They knew enough to feel like they could feel at peace with that part of their life, so they could then just kind of go on and do whatever like seemed best to them. And I've met plenty of skeptics and plenty of people who were atheists, who didn't believe in God or Christianity, who again were either open or unopen. But that kind of that precondition, you could say, of people that I interacted with, there was very little I could do to make someone open or unopen. And that was something that took me time to like learn. I thought I could challenge people. I thought I could like ask questions, or I could like do different things to kind of open that box up. But I think that that's a God thing. I think God is either working in someone's life and their heart, beginning to stir and have them wrestle with the bigger questions and curiosities about him. And I was either there to be able to like help inform and help that person journey through those curiosities, those doubts, those questions. Or again, if that person was not really curious, I wasn't going to create curiosity within them.
So you were a conduit.
Yeah.
Your job was to plant the seed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as Cru, was there any prerequisite? Could anybody come
to Cru?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So what would Cru look like during the day on campus? What would that look like? Do you have meetings?
Yep. So, no day looked the same, and no Cru ministry looks the same. There's, our general purpose is the same, but you could say the clientele of Bowling Green is very different than other universities around Ohio and around the nation. And you take the people at Bowling Green, they're very different than the people at Boston University. And so the way Cru operates, like we're trying to be as effective as possible to engage as many people as we can in spiritual conversations. And so, there's a lot of outreach, a lot of just trying to make ourselves known and available, like kind of in the big marketing sense, but a big part of it is the personal sense. Quite a bit of our time was spent trying to engage in individual conversations. And we did that in a variety of different ways. I would approach random people that I didn't even know. Just, hey, do you want to have a conversation, a spiritual conversation? And a lot of students would say yes.
So you just walk up to somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I'm maybe on campus, they're used to that kind of stuff, right? I don't know. But so how were those transactions?
Well, that was what was fun about college students. Again, not everyone's open to conversation, but students, they might not think that they have a lot of free time, but they have a lot of free time that, you could tell, like during exam week, people were not open to like random conversations with strangers, but by and large, a lot of students were open to being approached by someone and attending a conversation. And we always approached it as, I always, obviously, like I feel very strongly about what I believe. I think I know who Jesus really is, both as the man that he was when he walked on the earth and who he is now as he exists, as the eternal Son of God. But you could say my first intention towards them wasn't just to come and deliver a message. My first intention was to engage this person and see, are they actually really spiritually curious or not? And so, and a lot of that is, hey, let's have a conversation. Let me ask you some questions and I'll just listen. And people are not listened to very much. I think that was a felt need that we met at Cru, is that a lot of people don't have someone who's genuinely willing to hear their thoughts and ask the questions with no strings attached. And so that was really our first goal, was to offer that to students. And then students that wanted to further the conversation, and you could pick this up as they began to like talk, they would begin to ask you questions in return. Then you could then begin to like kind of share what you believed and like what you thought.
Yeah. Do you find, Nick, that some of the circumstances you would run into with that 18 to 22-year-old range, is it different than talking to somebody between their 30s and 40s? Are a lot of the same situation? They're just older? Are there any similarities?
I think that there are some similarities. I think either, again, like someone is either open and curious and actually really like wanting to know what the truth is. or they're not. I think when you run into people like more my age, who I'm 38 years old, like late 30s, there can just be more dry cement, for good or for bad. Like I now need to be someone who's instructing my kids. Hopefully I've asked those questions and I've learned something that I can pass those down to my own children, and that kind of cement some convictions in my own heart. But I think a lot of the engagement, the need for relationship, the open dialogue, asking good questions, the exploratory heart, those conditions, if someone's really going to consider Christianity, consider Jesus, and grow towards him and with him, those things still need to be there, whether you're 65, 35, or 25.
Yeah. You mentioned you have a family, children.
Yeah, 4 of them.
4 children. All right.
Yeah.
We said 4 kids. So working on the college ministry for 13 years, and you talked a little bit about you kind of got to meet kids where they are. So I'm assuming it wasn't an 8 to 5 job.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. So what was it like for your family and your wife? I mean, it's almost like everybody's got to be into this.
Yeah. It is a lifestyle. Yeah. Being in the ministry, whether it's church or college, you and your wife have to have the mission like aligned. You've got to be together in it. Even though Allie would engage in the college ministry, absolutely, and we would have students into our house and stuff. I obviously did the majority of the heavy lifting of what our ministry looked like together, and Allie handled the majority of stuff like back at home. And we had, it's been really refining and growing in our marriage. I think the thing about college ministry, I think it made our relationship stronger, just because I didn't work a more traditional, like 9 to 5 or more predictable schedule. I was working multiple evenings in a given month. My seasons of life, whether it was the fall, the spring, or the summer, would swing and change drastically. Crew would have us do these summer missions where we would uproot our family and either go to Chicago or Colorado. And my wife would have to carry a lot of the packing load for those things. And so she made a lot of sacrifices towards that. And we had to just be on the same page about what were each of us giving in order for us to pursue this calling together.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of ministers. I've talked to a lot of ministers, and it seems like the one common denominator amongst every minister is a pretty strong spouse, pretty strong wife, because they got to be 100% on board. They got to be behind you, and it sounds like you had that.
Yeah.
So you were involved in the campus ministry for 13 years. I know you did some missionary work. You mentioned a little bit about every year you had to go out to Colorado or places like that. Walk me through a little bit from the missionary side of being in ministry. What were some of the things you got involved with there?
Yeah. The wonderful thing about Crew being international is that we just got to go to a lot of different places. My kids and my family got to go to a lot of different places. And I got to work with people around the world. My wife and I, our first step towards ministry was actually serving overseas in Germany for a year. And then there was a season of my time with Crew where I was specifically planting campus ministries in Southeast Asia, in India, and having to go over there and work with their national Indian staff, and working with college students in India. And so I've been super blessed to have a lot of experiences and work with a lot of different types of people.
So what's that like? I think a lot of us are familiar with missionaries and mission trips, but I mean, you're going over to India. I mean, what's the communication barrier, and are they open to hearing from you? Are they open to hearing about the word? What's that experience like?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot more ordinary than people might think. And when I say ordinary, what I mean is that when you're beginning to like tread in the people's lives and their stories, and you're trying to like start ministries in different places, it's hard work, just like it is anywhere else. And There is the adventure to missionary work. I mean, again, it's exciting to go to new places and see new cultures. But once you get over that initial sort of, this is exciting to ride a fast train in India and be squeezed in with all these people or try new foods and stuff. Once you get over that, it's just really hard work. Like you're in different climates. You're having to figure out and overcome barriers to be able to connect with and be able to like be effective in different people's lives. And you struggle with yourself. I think my time in missionary work, if anything, I learned that I'm a very selfish person. Like you think like, oh, I'm going to go over to this foreign country. I'm going to do all this good and give my life away. But then when you're actually there, you just are overly concerned and can be overly concerned about your own personal well-being. And so I was really confronted with some really ugly parts of my own character and my own person serving overseas.
Interesting. And you mentioned India, but you've gone other places as well.
Yeah. So that year that Al and I served overseas, we picked up, and for a whole year, we lived in Germany. We didn't come back to the States. We didn't celebrate holidays here. We were put on a team of people that we didn't even know and hadn't even met. And we basically uprooted our life and we were dropped in Freiburg, Germany. And we started a ministry there, and we started going on campus.
When you decided to do that, you're involved in ministry. What's your wife doing at that time? Like, did she have to uproot a job? What?
Oh yeah. Well, we both did that together. Like, I was in social work. She was a teacher. We were both very content in our jobs. We were 23 years old, I think, at the time. We loved our jobs, our local church, but we felt and believed that God had called us to do this, and we wanted to do this. And so together we left our jobs. We raised the finances that we needed in order to go and be a part of planting a campus ministry.
So you weren't sponsored. You had to raise your money to go over there.
Yep. Had to raise our own money and ask people, would they believe in us enough and this project enough to actually sacrificially give and partner with us to make this work happen.
You did that for the entire 13 years of Cru. You had to raise your own income, correct?
Yes, that's true. And I would say, a lot of people can be like, man, I can't believe that you raise your own money. And there was times that it was hard to raise money. And it's hard to ask people to give. But the more that I got to see God work in people's lives, the more I believed in what I was doing, the more that I believed that it was a worthwhile investment for people to make financially.
Yeah. So you've been in ministry now for 16 or so years, 15 years or so. How did you get involved? What point of your life did you say, yeah, I think I'm going to get in ministry and I'm going to go to India, I'm going to Germany, and I'm going to ride those fast trains, and I'm going to work on the college campus, and I'm going to raise money. I mean, how did you get to that point in your own life?
Yeah. Well, what it wasn't was I wasn't at any point in time in my story, my journey. And I would say this is true for my wife, Allie, too. We weren't visited by God, and there was no sort of we heard his audible voice say go and do this. God is so cool because he wants to work with us in a very personal way. And he doesn't just lay the whole journey out in front of us, however it is, whatever vocation that God calls us to. And so for me, my own personal story started when I was 18 years old, and I had a religious background. I was raised in the church. But I began to really ask, do I really believe this? Because you know what? I don't live it. I do whatever I want to do. And I make whatever decisions I want to make.
In the church. So you went to church so you had a foundation, but you were questioning.
But I was questioning, is this really true? Is Jesus is who he really is? And I think the internal tension, not just with my lifestyle, but really the internal question that I begin to wrestle is, who is God really?
Why did you mention you were 18?
Yeah.
Why at 18? Were you at a period of life, or? what was going on that was a time frame where you were starting to say, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is different for different people. You know, some people don't begin to ask those questions until they're in their 30s, 40s, or even 70s or 80s. And some people ask those questions earlier. But there's a good chunk of people in our society, the way our society is built, that coming of age is right around that time where you begin to have more independence from like your family, your prominent place of where your identity is. And so I don't think I was cognizant. I wasn't like aware of this at the time. But as I began to have freedom from my family, I just began to say, do I really think that this is true? Do I really believe this? And I think for myself, I was uncomfortable calling myself a believer if I didn't really believe.
Yeah.
So I just wasn't going to be the type of person that was like, yeah, let me just kind of put Christian on my Instagram or my Facebook, and let me just kind of put images of myself like in church if I didn't really think that Jesus is a real deal and he was worth like living my life for.
Well,
And so
you mentioned something that's kind of interesting, and I think we all go through this a little bit. You mentioned that 18 is that kind of that coming of age, if you will, and you go out, many go off to college, or you move out on your own. And I think when that tether is cut from that security that you had, you start to feel alone a little bit, and then you start to question things like, hey,
yeah,
back to your spirituality that we started this, right? You begin to question, wait a minute, where am I fitting in all this? I know where I fit when I lived at home. I know where I fit when I was in high school and I ran track, or I was on the debate team, or, was on the football team, and I had all my friends. But now my friends are this way, that way, and I don't know where I'm going. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. I think some of that, it's very independent of age, but I think that's the time when I think people really begin to question is they just start to feel adrift, or I'm out here by myself and I need to figure some things out.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think spiritual learning and growth is really similar to like learning and growth in every area. Like when you start something new, you kind of go into this like you're a novice. And so you start taking in a lot of information. You can feel overwhelmed by the amount of information. You can feel like overloaded. I can't make sense of all these details of all the bits of information that people say, or like what I read or what I watch. And so what I notice for people is that when they begin to explore, they can feel inundated by all that information, and then they quit. And so they feel overwhelmed, and they're like, I'll never make sense of this. And they just kind of give up. And I would say, the early part of my journey, it was probably a solid 2 years before I really began to like get a tether of like what the heart of Christianity and Jesus was really about.
So when you started that journey, where did you go? Where did you say, well, hey, I got to figure this out if God's really who he says he is, or Jesus who he's, where did you go? How did you know where to go?
Yeah, well, I didn't go to the church. Even though I was like raised in the church, I wasn't looking to get involved in a youth group. I had my own stereotypes about those people and those pastors, and youth ministers do an incredible amount of good. I just had been exposed enough, and I dealt with my own social insecurities that wasn't a place for me. And so I think one place I began to go was I began to pray, and I began to ask God to just help me. And that help didn't come for like 8 months, but I just began to like say, like, I want to know who you are. Will you show me who you are? I picked up the Bible and began to read it, and I failed at that. Like I tried reading it. I made this commitment that I'm going to start reading the Bible, and like a couple of days in, like any 18-year-old male, I was like, this is hard and I don't understand this. I'm just going to quit this. But I think like if we're really curious, I think if we really want to know, like God puts things, people, resources in front of us, and we have to decide whether or not we're going to take advantage of those things.
But
So one of those things was this,
can I stop you there one second, though?
yeah.
I want to ask you a question. You said something that's pretty important. You said, hey, if we're, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but you said, hey, if we're seeking, if we're open to trying to figure out who God is, God will put things or people in your path to help you. Do you think we have to take that first step? Is that what you're saying? Do we have to kind of open ourselves up to say, hey, I'm seeking there, and then God responds? What's your view on that?
Um, well, I'll say that God is the first mover. God, whether we realize it or not, God is the first mover. I don't know if it's necessarily within human nature to just to become open and curious about spirituality, because there is some unsafety about it. And we as people, we want to be safe. Like I said at the beginning, we want to find those boxes. We want to make first and judgments and impressions so I can kind of create a safe world for myself. And when I begin to ask hard spiritual questions and I enter into that journey, I now wander into like a jungle, and it's not safe there. And I think for us to arrive at that point, God has done something, whether we realize it or not. God has done something to begin to stir in our heart that He would have us journey with Him. We might feel unsafe, but we're safe like with Him.
Well, that's interesting. I think you answered it very well. So what you're saying is you think God's the first mover. Mm-hmm. And if we're feeling something in our heart, it very well could be God's tugging on you.
Yeah.
He's saying, hey, there's more out there. I think you need to investigate a little bit more. Or, hey, I'm calling you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think as people, I mean, with your like audience that's like listening, what it is that can move our hearts to think about the deeper questions and to consider God, it could be anything. I mean, some people experience tragedy, and that's the thing that moves them. But some people experience the same tragedy and they're not moved by that. Working with college students, I would meet guys who had tragic breakups with their girlfriend, and all of a sudden they were super spiritually open and curious. And I've had other guys who just sort of doubled down on a selfish lifestyle. Some people like seek and try to find as much pleasure in life as possible, and they feel like they've experienced everything that this life has to offer, and all of a sudden once they hit that pinnacle, they become dissatisfied, and they're like, why am I dissatisfied? And that is potentially a launching point. So there can be a lot of, I mentioned again, coming of age, some people having children. There's lots of different ways that God can move and stir in our heart.
Yeah. But I think the key is what you said is when that stir starts to happen, we should respond. Mm-hmm. We should take some steps. Now, you mentioned you started to get that stir. You started to feel that. You had some questions, started seeking some things out. You said maybe it was 8 months later or so. What were some things you uncovered, or what was that process that kind of kept you going? Was there truths that you found? What was it that kept you moving?
So at the end of my senior year of high school, I got connected with a Crew high school guy named Brad. And Brad was kind of in and around like our high school. I didn't know him personally, but I knew of him. But I was not interested in him. I wasn't interested in Crew or anything that he was like offering. But he had reached out to me at the end of my senior year of high school, and all he said to me was, he called me on the phone and he was like, hey, I don't know if this means anything to you, but God has put you on my heart, and I just want to get together and just kind of see if there's some way that I can help you in your spiritual journey. And as an 18-year-old, even again, I'm already asking some of these deep questions. I'm already praying and asking God, show yourself to me. But when Brad offered me to that, I blew him off. I was like, I'm busy. I'm in wrestling season. I've got a girlfriend. I've got life going on. When it's convenient for me, like I'll like get to you. And so he then reached out to me again, and he wasn't pushy. He just offered me a couple different times, and finally I bit to be polite. And so I'm like, I'll meet with this guy and just give him one meeting and then kind of tell him, thank you, but I'm not interested. Because I thought he just wanted me to be a part of his crew thing. And so when we sat down the first time, we met at Wendy's. This is back in Cincinnati, Ohio. We met at Wendy's.
You're still in high school.
I'm still in high school. I'm going to graduate high school in like a month and a half.
Okay.
He says he shot and this works. I think it's God and my personality, the way I am wired. But he looked at me and he said, God has put you on my heart. I don't want you to get involved. I'm not looking for you to get involved in crew. You're graduating in 6 weeks. It makes no sense for you to get involved in crew. But if you have questions about God, then I want to make myself available and I want to answer those questions for you. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted someone who, no strings attached, would give me their time, allow me to ask my hard questions that I had, and would shoot straight with me. And that's what he did. For 6 weeks, we met. We began to like get into the Bible, but I came and I could ask any question that I want. And it wasn't that like Brad gave me like rock solid, 100% proof like answers. Because he would sometimes admit, that's a really good question. Let me research that for you and I'll get back to you next week. So he had an air of humility and saying even he doesn't have all the answers. But the one thing I got from Brad, well, two things. One, I could ask my really hard questions. How can there be a good and loving God when there's so much evil in the world? How can there be a good and loving God when really evil things have been done to me? But then secondly, is that there was logical, rational answers. And so Brad would come, he would share with me. And again, it wasn't like it answered every single question. It was enough to say like, Christianity cares about my mind and it cares that it has rational answers and that faith is like a rational thing. And so that kind of was the thing that really propelled me to continue to like explore Jesus.
So how different was that understanding of Christianity is interested in me, it's rational, it's logical. How different was that understanding from your understanding prior to that?
I mean, some of it was probably like adolescence, like when I would go to church or I was brought to church by my mom, like I was being a kid about it. I wasn't being serious. I was there to like make friends or goof around and stuff. And so again, I wasn't like overly wanting to ask like those hard questions. I think some of it too, and I'm a parent like this as well with my own kids, and I try to guard against this. I want my kids to believe. I want them to come to a genuine faith in Jesus and who he is, the same faith that I have. But it can be really hard fielding your own kids' questions because you want them to make the same types of decisions that you have arrived at making. You want your kids to also be safe and protected. And so my mom has been tremendously influential in my spiritual life and my life, but there are just some questions that were probably too hard for her personally to answer. She just wasn't the right person. Yeah. And she would even admit to me later, she's like, I prayed that God would provide someone for you to ask those questions too. Because I think that she knew I didn't feel safe enough to come to her, or she wasn't that safe place for me to ask those types of things.
Yeah. So you meet with Brad, and he's very inspirational for you and influences you greatly. So now you're probably getting ready to go to college. So where are you at as you enter into college? Where are you at with your faith or your understanding or all of that?
Yeah, I was resolved. I think if you're going to do a journey, if you're going to go through and blaze a trail through the jungle, it's going to be hard. You're not sure exactly where you're going to wind up at, but you know that it's like going to be hard work. And so as I got to college, I wasn't sure exactly all the moral decisions I was going to make. I wasn't exactly sure of where my career was going to be, but I knew in my heart, like God is real. Truth is something that I can discover. And so I'm going to continue to pursue discovering truth. And so when I got to campus, Brad had actually hooked me up with the college ministry at Bowling Green. And I just met, God just had mentors there, a guy named Steve Risky, particularly, who was the same type. He just made himself available. He allowed me to ask the hard questions. He really challenged me in the sense of like, I would say I believe things, but I wouldn't live it out. He challenged me that my lifestyle ought to match my beliefs. But he did so in such a way, while he challenged me, he always accepted me for who I was. When I failed, he never did I disappoint him or let him down. He gave sacrificially of his time. Even though I was a really selfish 18-year-old like freshman, he was just patient with me and allowed me to kind of make my own mistakes, my own decisions. But I think the one thing that I experienced in him was that he believed in me, that he believed that God was doing a work in my life. He believed that God had a purpose for my life. And he was willing to invest in that purpose.
It's interesting because you mentioned two people now, and the common theme through both of them seems to be they were very non-threatening to you. Mm-hmm. It wasn't their way or the highway. They didn't have absolute truths to you. If they didn't know an answer, they would say, hey, I don't know, let me get to. But they were very accepting of you. And that's probably a good segue into that's really our relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of, and I think that's probably the journey we all go down. Is we all have that individual that kind of introduced us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's unique. We found something unique about him. And then we begin to get introduced to Christ, and you see a lot of the same traits. That, man, he's accepting me for where I am. Mm-hmm. And so where'd you go with all that then? You go through college, you got this understanding now, and
yeah,
where's that go?
You have to land your plane at some point in time, like there's a sense of being open. You're kind of I don't know, it's like a skier that does like a jump off of like a hill. Like you feel like you're free floating for a period of time. You're trying to figure out who you are and like who God is. But at some point in time, like you've got to come back down to earth. You got to land somewhere in order to like kind of run along like that grounding. And that, again, I'm still exploring who Jesus is. I'm still learning about who God is. And that hopefully I don't want that openness to ever close for the rest of my life. But we have to land somewhere in order to get somewhere. And so I think as I learned that Jesus was who he said that he was God in the flesh, that he came to save me, I wanted to press into what did that mean? And that just took years and years of just kind of living with others, doing faith with like other people, having community in my life, reading the Bible for myself and not just sort of what I heard preached on Sunday morning. And as I learned about God, I took advantage of opportunities to go and do missionary work in college. I learned that I love people, that I get really excited to talk about these things with others. And so I think as I continued to do that, God continued to open up doors for me and Allie, to make this like right now, like a vocational choice for us.
What do you, when you look back, what was that first step of faith where you said, I mean, you used a good analogy, at some point you got to land, right? Mm-hmm. And I think all people who experience Christ, it's a high. It's like, I had no idea, man, oh man, this is wow. But it's something you can't live there. I mean, I guess maybe Christ would like us to live there, but it's hard, right? It's hard as a human to live there. So you have to land your plane. So at what point when you landed your plane, did you take that step of faith where you said, I'm going to start responding now to this, meaning you're going to go out and you're going to become you're going to go down the minister path, or you're going to start leading a group? What was that step of faith for you?
The very first one was with Brad. And as I began to read the Bible with Brad back in high school, he asked me to start a Bible study with some of my friends. And he wasn't asking me to bring my friends to him. He's like, you're learning. Now go do it with your friends. And it was like my current friend group. He didn't ask me to go start with some new friend group. But that was like, I did that. Like I responded and I said like, yes. And I don't even know why I said yes, because it wasn't like I didn't see myself as a leader or influencer in any way.
Were your
I just
friends believers? Where were your friends at this point?
all over the place, like all over the place. All I knew is that I just think with Brad, I got a taste of the real Jesus, and I wanted other people to know about him. And that just kind of stuck with me as I got to college and I began to like make friendships with guys on my floor, and I went on through college and gotten more involved in crew and other things. Whether someone's a Christian, they've been walking with God for a long time, or someone knows nothing of Jesus, I wanted to be around people that wanted to discover who he really was, and I wanted to have those conversations with them, and I was willing to do it with anybody.
So when you start to take that step of faith, you mentioned your friends, and even today, how difficult, how scary was it for you to now step out and I'm going to start talking about Jesus to people? How is that?
Yeah, I mean, again, growing up in a church, I was like, I'll never be a missionary. I'm never going to a foreign country. In my mind, it didn't make sense. Why would I risk myself to talk to someone about Jesus? There's other people that were probably smarter and more bold in their faith and knew more than I did, knew more of themselves. We talk about what we love, and I watch a good movie. I want other people to know about that movie or that TV show. When I love the Cincinnati Bengals, and I want to talk about Joe Burrow. He just got drafted. I want to talk about him. But in a more profound sense, in an eternal sense, something that has to do with like our whole self, I discovered this Jesus who loved me and accepted me for the broken person that I was. He didn't ask me to change anything of myself before I came to him, and I was received by him, and I was unconditionally loved by him. And as I experienced that, theologically, I didn't have words for that, but just as I experienced that and I learned about who he was, I wanted to talk to other people about it. And it wasn't like I need to convince people in order for them to now do the same thing I'm doing or to sell them on something. I just wanted them to taste and see what I was personally experiencing for myself. Yeah. That eventually built into like being someone who's a part of like trying to strategically build the church and build groups. But the heart of that still is the same. When I interact with my neighbors, my friends now today, I want them to know the real Jesus, because God invites us to be in relationship with him and experience him and know something of him. And even though there's strategy and methods, those things only serve in order for people to discover that there's a real God who made them and wants them to have a real relationship with him.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody that, and I'll ask this question, but this is what you do every day. What do you share with somebody that is struggling with knowing the truth, or maybe they're not even thinking of God? Mm-hmm. They're just struggling. Yeah. What do you share with them?
I encourage them to stick with it. Doubts, whether they're unanswered questions or doubts of, I don't think I'm strong enough to continue down this path. Doubts are the pathway to genuine faith. True faith is tested faith. True belief is tested belief. You and I both are married, and we love our wives. And Allie and I know you, Dan, with Val, you guys have gone through really hard seasons together. And in the midst of those seasons, it can feel really dark. You want to quit. You wonder, do I have the strength? Does she have the strength? Are we capable of making it? And then there's all the opportunities to take the shortcut and quit and give up. The benefit of sticking it through is that you arrive at a deeper intimacy and knowledge of one another, and more resolve to like continue and to build this thing together. And the same thing is true with God. yeah, like and not to get too much into this like right now, but like I have my own history of being abused, and I had to deal with that with God. God, how can you allow these things to happen? If you're sovereign and over everything, you knew every hair follicle, although I don't have very many right now, any right now, every hair follicle on my head. How is it that you can allow this to happen? And I can tell you what that was like, but I can't recreate what it was like to actually feel those things and struggle with those things with God. But all I know is that as I remained consistent to trust Him to see me through it, like He did, and there was healing and there was understanding for me personally in those dark times of my faith.
Yeah, you had a good quote there. I hope I can restate it.
Okay.
Said, doubts are the pathway to faith.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And again, one reason I love working with college students is they ask the questions. One thing that makes me sad about some of my peers who are my age is that we stop asking the questions. And so, but yeah, like there should be that part of us that is always, again, exploring and curious and wondering, who is God and how does He relate to me and how do I live this thing out? Those things are good things for us to like move through. They're not negative things.
Nick, was there a specific scripture that when you read it, or maybe you heard it a million times, but then all of a sudden one time it just hit you? Do you have a scripture that you kind of reflect back on and said, man, that's the scripture that did it for me? Or this is the scripture that means everything to me today. Mm-hmm. You have one of those?
Yeah, I've had different scriptures at different seasons of my life. So some people have like a life verse. I don't know if I have necessarily like a life verse. But a powerful scripture that God has like used in my life is Ephesians 2:4, where it says, "But God loved us through Christ." And that section of Ephesians 2:1-10, it talks about how it is that we as people were, before God intersected our journey, that we just were really about trying to do what we thought was best and just kind of living just for our own pleasures and whatever it is in our minds that we thought was correct and right. And that's where I was. I just lived for myself. And again, it wasn't because I think sometimes we think that we can be morally okay. That passage isn't about being morally okay. What it has to do is that I was Lord of my life, and I did whatever fitted Nick and seemed best to Nick. And I was blind to my own ways of the ways that I manipulated people, and I used people in order to benefit me, in order for me to feel good about me. But then that scripture says that even though I was doing whatever was best for me, but God came along and He loved me through Jesus, that the sinful, broken me, He like paid for that, and He loved it. He didn't ask me to change it. He was willing to embrace me for that. And then as this free gift of forgiveness, I could then, even though I didn't deserve it, I could have life with God again. I could have a relationship with God again. And so that's about as close to my life verse as it gets, because I'm still a sinful person. I'm still a person that's inclined to do what I think is best for me. My wife reminds me of this plenty. But I'm still that same person but God loves me, even though I can be so selfish and self-involved.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you have a very, very interesting story. And I know you and I have been talking for quite a while to try to arrange today. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on to the show and to share your story. I mean, it's definitely a very interesting story. So, hey, thank you for taking the time to come in. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, how would they contact you? Where can they find you?
Probably email is the best way. Nick@bgcovenant.org. bgcovenant.org. I'm also on Facebook, Nicholas Gillispie. If people want to Facebook me or like send a direct message or something like that. And yeah, whether it's sharing their story or wanting to have just someone that like is willing to listen to their story, that's why I do what I do. I don't think everyone's wired the way I am, but I love to hear where people are at and help people discover the real God.
Well, hey, thank you for taking the time today. And as Nick said, if you want to reach out to Nick, it's nick@bgcovenant.org. He would love to hear from you, whether you maybe have a question for him, whether you just would like to learn a little bit more about him, feel free to reach out to him. Also, thanks for listening in today. If you like shows like this, hit subscribe, follow us, be aware of more shows. We have some out there on our YouTube channel already. There'll be more coming like this. So, hey, thanks for joining in today. Talk to you soon.